Welcome to her Fireside Stories, where captivating tales are told by the comforting glow of a warm, crackling fire. Tonight's story will chill you to the bone with its shocking revelations. Imagine discovering that your own son's fiancée isn't just dreaming about the wedding, but secretly budgeting the money she'll inherit when you're no longer alive. Harriet, our brave heroine, finds herself entangled in a web of betrayal, suspicion, and carefully concealed plots. But just when Celia, the cunning bride-to-be, believes she has everyone fooled, Harriet decides enough is enough and plans a brutal surprise that exposes Celia's sinister intentions. How does Harriet unravel Celia's twisted plans? And what exactly was that brutal surprise that left Celia speechless and defeated? Stick around to hear the entire gripping tale and find out how this extraordinary story unfolds. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe to her Fireside Stories to support the channel and stay tuned for more powerful, unforgettable narratives. Also, leave a comment sharing your thoughts and tell us from where in the world you're tuning in. I can't believe my own son's fiancé is planning my funeral payout before I'm even in the ground. That was the phrase rattling through my mind the day I discovered the shocking truth. And if anyone had told me a year ago that this young woman, kind-eyed, sweet-voiced Celia, would turn out to be calculating and cold, I would have laughed in disbelief. But life has a way of blindsiding you with truths you'd rather not face. I'm Harriet, a retired secretary with more frizzy gray hair than I care to admit, and for the longest time, I wanted to believe that my son's new love was genuine. The moment I met her, I sensed the quiet polish in her words. She was graceful, quick to smile, and always came bearing some little token of affection, a bag of cookies, a box of chocolates, or a bouquet of flowers. In the beginning, I thanked my lucky stars that Dominic, my only son, gentle to the point of naivety, had finally found someone who made his eyes light up. But fate is a patient teacher, and it led me down a winding road of deception and heartbreak I never anticipated. I've spent my life living on the outskirts of the city with my husband, Roland. We each worked simple jobs. He spent nearly 3 decades as a city landscaper, tending public green spaces in the scorching sun and the biting cold. I was an administrative assistant for the local elementary school, juggling phone lines and crayon-stained memos. We never raked in big money, but we balanced our budget so carefully that upon retirement, we owned our modest home outright and collected a pair of pensions that gave us just enough to live comfortably, one might even say peacefully. The best part was that Dominic never had to worry about our finances. We had structured our world to ensure he could stand on his own without feeling he had to support us in old age. Quick check-in. If you've made it this far, let me know your thoughts. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the build-up. Comment 2 if you'd like it to get even more intense right away. Dominic was always a caring boy, even as a kid. When he was 8, I once found him hiding under the porch with an injured stray kitten, stroking its tiny head and promising to protect it from the world. I took both of them inside, where we washed the kitten's wounds and fed it bits of chicken from our dinner. The look in Dominic's eyes then was the same look he gave Celia the first time he brought her home, like he'd found a wounded animal that needed sheltering. I suppose that was his nature, to see potential in everything and everyone, to believe that love could heal any bruise. Perhaps that is why it took him so long to sense the bruises Celia was quietly inflicting on his wallet, on his future, and on our peace of mind. The day Dominic announced, "Mom, Dad, I have something big to share," I remember exchanging a hopeful glance with Roland. Our boy was 33, with a steady job at an accounting firm. He was practical, disciplined, and honest, good qualities for a partner, no doubt, but sometimes too gentle for his own good. When Dominic has news, it's usually because something truly out of the ordinary has occurred. That evening, the front door swung open, and in walked a tall young woman with carefully styled chestnut hair, a delicate gold necklace resting against her collarbone, and a cautious but genuine smile. It's funny. If you had asked me to conjure a perfect future daughter-in-law, I might have imagined someone just like her. She seemed to radiate warmth. Yet in hindsight, I realized that glow was more a reflection of her intelligence than her heart. Quick audience engagement. Where are you reading from right now? Comment your city or country to let me know how far this story is traveling. I love thinking about how these words can span countless miles, connecting us all in one shared experience. But in that moment, I wasn't thinking about global connections. I was thinking, my boy might have finally found the one. Celia kissed my cheek, offered Roland a heartfelt handshake, and said in a voice so gentle it could put a toddler to sleep, "Mr. and Mrs. Davies, I've heard so much about you. I can't believe I'm finally here." I hustled into the kitchen, heart drumming with excitement, to prepare extra portions of dinner. Dominic told us Celia had grown up in a working-class neighborhood, that she was proud of her father, who toiled in a warehouse for meager wages, and her mother, a part-time cashier battling health issues. There was a softness in her voice when she spoke of them, a reverence that seemed so authentic at the time. I liked that. I liked a person who understood family obligations. But I quickly learned that her concept of obligation had a different flavor than the simple love and loyalty that shaped my existence. Looking back, I remember how she turned to me and said, "Dominic told me you're both retired with pensions. That's amazing. It must be such a relief to be financially secure." I brushed it off as small talk. After all, older folks often discuss retirement, health plans, or mortgages with younger people. But there was an unsettling gleam in her eyes, an awareness I couldn't quite place. I told her we brought in just over $5,000 a month combined, owned our home outright, and had zero debts. To me, it was nothing but a small victory story about living responsibly. To her, it must have been a treasure map. Celia grew more attached to me, or my finances, with each subsequent visit. She'd sidle up next to me, hooking her arm through mine as we wandered the grocery store aisles. She always seemed to appear at the exact moment I paid for something, tilting her head and smiling as though soaking in the subtle hints of our financial habits. Occasionally, I'd catch her studying the mail on our dining table, my pension statements, perhaps, or Roland's retirement benefits summary, always with that sweet expression on her face. Was I overthinking? I told myself I was being paranoid. My boy loved her, and she seemed to adore him back. Why question her motives? Feedback moment. How do you feel about Celia at this stage? Comment 1 if you believe in her sincerity, or 2 if you suspect ulterior motives. Roland, my husband, rarely mistrusts people. He's the sort of man who believes everyone deserves the benefit of the doubt until they give you a reason to think otherwise. Yet even he started noticing little red flags. One night, as we sipped our tea, he said softly, "Harriet, don't get me wrong. Celia's thoughtful and all, but there's something in how she navigates conversation, especially about money." I raised an eyebrow, secretly relieved I wasn't the only one picking up the strange vibes. I asked what he meant, and he admitted she always had a question about some financial detail. Our mortgage payments, the interest rates, even property taxes. Each time, she disguised her queries as polite curiosity. But Roland sensed a pattern. Our sense of unease grew after Dominic and Celia came over for an impromptu dinner. A few glasses of wine loosened everyone's tongues. Celia tossed out a casual question about our will. "Have you ever considered leaving the house directly to Dominic?" Her tone was playful, even smiling as she asked, "He's the only child after all. Might as well secure his future early, right?" Roland shrugged it off, but I saw a flicker of confusion in Dominic's eyes. It wasn't something we'd ever discussed openly in front of guests. Typically, that's a conversation we'd have privately as a family, maybe with a lawyer. But Celia approached it like discussing weekend plans, casual, airy, but definitely deliberate. Within days, Celia turned up with precisely the brand of chocolate truffles I had once mentioned liking. She was always dropping by with small gifts, nothing extravagant but just enough to seem thoughtful. It should have made me feel pampered. Instead, I felt studied, as if my preferences, routines, and even my slight weaknesses were data points for her to gather and eventually exploit. Still, I tried to keep an open mind. Our Dominic was in love, and he beamed whenever she walked into the room. I didn't want to crush his joy with my suspicions, especially if I was wrong. Curious about your impressions. Where do you see this going? Comment 1 if you think Harriet's intuition is correct, or 2 if you think Celia might still surprise us. And then the ante was upped. Celia began discussing high-end real estate, a condominium complex called Lakeview Heights. It boasted a pristine view of a sparkling lake, 24-hour security, and a glamorous lobby that resembled a five-star hotel's lounge. Honestly, it was an impressive place, but it was also double or triple the mortgage of an average condo in our region. The local property market had soared in recent years, and Lakeview Heights was an especially coveted address. One evening, Celia announced during dinner, "Dominic and I have talked, and we definitely need our own space right after the wedding. Lakeview Heights is perfect, near the best schools for our future children and a safe neighborhood for raising a family." Dominic coughed awkwardly, clearly taken by surprise, which told me this wasn't the first time she'd blindsided him with luxurious demands. "We can't afford that right now," he mumbled, glancing sideways at Celia. She ignored his comment or pretended not to hear it, flashing me a dazzling smile as she said, "I'm sure Dominic's parents will be so helpful during this transition. You both built a stable life. It'd be wonderful if you could lend us that stability as we start our journey." I felt an inner jolt. That was the moment I could no longer deny something was off. Her requests about money had gone from subtle to blatant. She didn't even bother couching it in gentle pleas. She framed it as a natural extension of our support for Dominic. My heart ached watching my son shift uncomfortably. There was a flicker of panic in his eyes, like a rabbit cornered by a fox, yet not wanting to believe danger lurked in the pretty face opposite him. Maybe it was the wine, but I couldn't hold my tongue. "We'll have to see," I said, my voice colder than usual. Celia's expression remained calm, though her eyes flickered with annoyance for a split second. Engagement check. The tension's building, isn't it? Comment 1 if you're loving the drama. Comment 2 if you'd rather Harriet confront Celia directly right now. Over the following days, Dominic tried to reassure us that Celia's demands were just enthusiasm getting ahead of itself. "She's excited," he said one morning, rubbing his temple with a look of mounting anxiety he couldn't hide. "She doesn't mean to pressure you. She just believes if we don't aim high, we'll never get anywhere." I heard his words, but in my heart, I sensed a fundamental shift had already begun. Celia was no longer hiding her ambitions behind a gentle veneer. She was proposing that Roland and I turn our humble nest egg, and ultimately our independence, into a golden ladder for her. The Lakeview Heights condo? That was just the first step. A few weeks later, on a warm Saturday afternoon, Celia pressed Dominic about car shopping, using phrases like "our future SUV" and "a safe vehicle for when we have kids," which all sounded perfectly reasonable on the surface. But the sticker price, $50,000, was anything but modest. She had seen some ad for a Land Rover, all glossy paint and luxury upgrades. Dominic asked if she truly needed such an expensive ride, to which she replied, "It's not about need, it's about value. Besides, your parents would want to keep us safe. They'd support that." The word support had begun to feel like a loaded gun, cocked and aimed directly at Roland and me. I remember how Roland's expression darkened when he first heard Celia's pitch about that lavish SUV. He's a quiet, good-natured man, but he hates seeing people get used. That night, after Dominic and Celia left, Roland simply said, "Harriet, we can't let her pin us down." I agreed, though part of me felt a pang of guilt. Like maybe we should help them a bit for Dominic's sake. But a bigger part knew that Celia was not just asking for help. She was systematically corralling us into paying for her grand aspirations. It was more than we could or should offer. Midway moment. What do you think of Celia's tactics? Comment 1 if you think Dominic needs a wake-up call, or 2 if you believe there's still a chance Celia might be acting out of genuine love. The real turning point came during a family-style dinner we arranged for both sets of parents. Celia insisted that her mother and father meet Roland and me, proclaiming it a necessary step before their wedding date could be set in stone. Something about how she phrased it, like we were all ticking boxes on a checklist, made me uneasy. Still, we arrived at the chosen restaurant on the outskirts of town, a cozy place that served big platters of home-cooked comfort food. Roland and I got there first, claiming a spacious booth near the back, hoping for some semblance of privacy. When Celia and Dominic walked in, her parents trailed behind. Her mother wore a too-tight floral blouse that accentuated her every movement. Her father, in a faded sports jacket, hovered with a subdued manner that bordered on sullen. After we exchanged polite greetings, we ordered our meals. The conversation started innocently enough. "Where are you from? How did you two meet?" But it didn't take long for Celia's mother to pivot the topic to hardships. "Our family struggled for years," she said with a practiced tremble in her voice. "Medical bills, you know. I've had to work 2 jobs just to keep us afloat." She dabbed her eyes with a napkin, though her cheeks remained suspiciously dry. Celia's father jumped in, clearing his throat loudly. "We're not looking for pity," he said, "but retirement isn't far off, and we have next to nothing saved. We always hoped Celia would marry someone, able to help." His gaze flicked to Dominic, as if sizing him up as potential rescue. My husband stared into his water glass, knuckles whitening around its rim. I felt an old ache settle in my chest. This wasn't about uniting two families in love. It was a thinly veiled negotiation. Celia smiled sweetly, refilling her mother's iced tea, as if to say, "Don't mind them. They're just honest folk." But I'd seen that act before, and I didn't buy it anymore. Engagement break. Are you on Harriet and Roland's side, or do you sympathize with Celia's family? Comment 1 for Harriet, 2 for Celia's side, or 3 if you think it's complicated. That dinner ended in a haze of uncomfortable half-smiles and unspoken tension. No one outright demanded money, but the implication was loud and clear. Celia's parents were gently but firmly planting a flag. If Dominic married Celia, they expected financial backing from him, and, by extension, from us. There was mention of monthly stipends, just to help with groceries and medical bills. They spoke as though the arrangement were perfectly natural, a standard tradition. My mind was spinning, but I kept my composure, nodding politely. Roland did the same, but I saw a vein pulsing in his temple. Once in the car, Celia let the mask slip entirely. She railed at Dominic, accusing him of ignoring family obligations. She claimed he was thoughtless for not instantly offering to help her parents. Dominic tried to placate her, stumbling over his words, but she wasn't in the mood for gentle excuses. "You can't possibly expect me to marry you if I have to constantly beg your parents for basic decency," she hissed. By the time we dropped them off, Dominic looked white as chalk, and Celia slammed the door behind her. That night, I barely slept. My mind cycled through every scenario. Could Celia be humiliated that her parents were so openly needy? Or was this all part of a bigger scheme she'd orchestrated from the start? The next morning, I found Dominic sitting on our porch steps, staring into the distance as though the horizon might hold answers. Mom, he began softly, am I being selfish? She's right that her parents have struggled. Maybe. Maybe if we love each other, we should share those burdens. Hearing him break down like that, I felt a pang of both sympathy and frustration. It wasn't that Roland and I refused to help in times of genuine need. But Celia's entire approach, her demands, her sense of entitlement, screamed of manipulation rather than honest partnership. Your turn to weigh in. Should Harriet step in more forcefully or wait for Dominic to see the light? Comment 1 if Harriet should intervene, 2 if she should give Dominic more space, or 3 if you're unsure. I did what any mother would do. I tried to talk to my son in private. I invited Dominic into my study, closing the door behind us. The old desk lamp cast a warm glow, illuminating the lines of worry etched on his brow. Dom, I said calmly, I know you love Celia, but have you really paused to ask if she loves you in the same way? He bristled at the question, as though he'd expected condemnation. I took his hands in mine, trying to convey a supportive tone. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them treat you like a doormat. You can contribute to her parents out of kindness, but that kindness should be recognized, not demanded. For a moment, I saw the walls in Dominic's mind crumble. He inhaled as if about to admit something, then exhaled slowly, shaking his head. Celia's just insecure, he finally murmured. Her family's had it tough. Maybe she's afraid of living the same hardships all over again, and a pang of empathy seized my heart. I wanted to believe that was true, but I couldn't forget the dinner, the mention of extravagant condos and luxury cars, and the unsubtle remark that we might have enough in our pensions to cover it all. I ended that conversation with a simple request. Don't rush into setting a wedding date. Please give it time, at least until you're sure of her motives. Dominic didn't promise anything, but he nodded gravely. Later that evening, Roland asked how it went. I told him we might have planted a seed of doubt. It'll grow, Roland said quietly, but only if Celia doesn't uproot it first. Before the story continues, let me know, are you with Harriet's approach so far? Comment 1 if you agree that she should plant seeds of caution, 2 if you think she's going too far, or 3 if you have mixed feelings. By then, I knew words alone might not save Dominic. People in love cling to illusions, especially the illusion that they can fix a person's deepest flaws. Sometimes only undeniable proof can break that spell, and so I prepared to gather it. James and I have spent our whole lives living simply and steadily. We were never that wealthy, but we were never in debt either. He used to work in maintenance department for the city, and I spent over 20 years as an administrative assistant at the local elementary school. 2 ordinary paychecks, nothing fancy, but surely enough to keep a roof over our heads and food on the table. Now that we're both retired, life's quieter. We live in an old house out in the suburbs between our 2 pensions we bring in just over $5 a month. The mortgage has long been paid off. Our days are easy grocery runs, home-cooked meals tending the yard. Weekend visits with old friends, nothing extravagant but peaceful. All the same, sometimes James plants roses in the backyard. I'll be in the kitchen brewing coffee by the window when I look up and catch a glimpse of those soft blooms swaying in the light. It feels like a reflection of our life now. Quiet, but not without its tenderness. The only thing that still keeps us up at night is our son Joe. He's 33 now, has a stable job, and he's a good kid. Reliable, grounded. It's just that when it comes to love, nothing's ever really stuck. James and I have never pushed him, not out loud anyway, but the hope's always there. We'd like to see him bring home someone solid, someone he could build a life with, someone who could ease our hearts as we grow older. Even as I tried to remain calm on the surface, inwardly I was piecing together a plan. Celia's slip-ups came in small moments, when she thought no one else was paying attention, or when she believed she had us wrapped around her little finger. One Saturday, I was out on the balcony repotting geraniums when I heard her voice floating through the open door. She was on the phone with a friend, speaking in that smug tone that shredded any illusions of innocence. "Trust me," she said. "Dominic's parents have a hefty pension, a fully paid off house, no mortgage, no debts. Once the ring's on my finger, I'll make sure we get the deed in our name sooner or later." I froze. The watering can trembled in my hand. That was the moment I realized Celia wasn't merely opportunistic. She was orchestrating a takeover. My love for Dominic would not let me stand by quietly. Carefully, I set down my watering can and turned on my phone's voice recorder. I captured snippets, just enough to confirm her intentions. She spoke of leveraging their guilt, of how parents in our generation always want to help their kids, how they can be coaxed to hand over the assets early. She laughed as she said it, as though the entire thing were a game. When Dominic emerged from the bedroom, Celia snapped off the call, flashing me a brilliant smile. "Harriet, can I help you repot anything?" Her eyes were wide with feigned innocence. I forced a polite grin, heart pounding. "Oh, I'm all done, dear. Thank you, though." I could feel the heat rise to my face, desperate to confront her on the spot. But I needed more. If I lashed out prematurely, she'd manipulate Dominic with tears, spinning a story of me misunderstanding her. No, this required incontrovertible evidence. I told Roland everything, and he agreed. We'd collect facts quietly. For Dominic's sake, we would become the watchers in the shadows. Engagement question. Does Harriet's strategy seem wise? Comment 1 if you think she's doing the right thing gathering evidence. Comment 2 if you'd prefer a direct confrontation. With my determination steeled, I reached out to a dear friend who'd once worked as a legal clerk. She introduced me to a young lawyer named Lindsay, who specialized in estate planning and family law. When I explained our predicament, Lindsay didn't seem surprised. "Unfortunately, this happens more often than people realize," she said. "A partner targets an individual from a financially stable background, wooing them while also sizing up the family's assets. It's a tale as old as time." We devised a plan that played on Celia's inherent desire for control. Lindsay would pose as an estate consultant offering a premarital financial readiness interview, a fancy term for making Celia believe she could lock down ownership documents or discover potential inheritance benefits. The idea was to see if Celia would incriminate herself by candidly discussing her strategies, believing it was a private consultation meant to help her. All I had to do was gently nudge Dominic into agreeing to this session by framing it as smart planning for their future. Lindsay assured me she had discreet recording equipment and that everything would be above board as long as Celia consented to the conversation. Of course, she'd never guess it was a trap. The day Lindsay called Celia, I pretended ignorance. Dominic was out, presumably dealing with the stress of balancing his love life and his parents. Celia answered on speakerphone, brightening at the mention of estate planning. "Oh, I'd love that," she chirped. "Dominic's parents would be so thrilled we're being proactive." She set an appointment for the following week at a downtown cafe. My gut churned with nervous energy. If Celia's conversation turned out to be mild, maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong, and this was all a misunderstanding. But deep inside, I feared her words would reveal something no mother wants to hear about their child's beloved partner. Quick check-in. The tension is palpable. Comment 1 if you're on edge and need the reveal soon. Comment 2 if you could read 10 more paragraphs of build-up. Sure enough, Celia strolled into that cafe with an air of confidence that bordered on triumph. Lindsay, seated at a corner table with a notepad and a discreetly placed recording device, welcomed her warmly. "Congratulations on your upcoming marriage," Lindsay began, flipping open her binder. "How can I be of service?" Celia wasted no time. She smiled sweetly and started listing details about Dominic's pay grade, our retirement figures, and the house's approximate worth. She talked about maximizing our family assets and how she intended to encourage Roland and me to place our home in Dominic's name. Then she added casually, "Of course, I'll be a co-signer if we manage to refinance or restructure. It just makes sense." Lindsay probed deeper, asking if Celia had concerns about Dominic's willingness. That's when Celia's facade wavered into a telling smirk. "Dominic's a sweetheart, soft as they come. He'll do anything if I push the right buttons. The real trick is making sure his parents don't tie things up in some trust that keeps me out. That's why I want to move fast." She even mentioned us by name, Harriet and Roland, calling us old-fashioned but easy to guilt. She laughed quietly, saying, "Let them think it's their idea to protect Dominic. Eventually, they'll sign those assets over. Then, if something happens, like Harriet's sudden medical emergency or, well, old age, Dominic and I will be next in line for the payout." My stomach twisted as I listened to the recording later, each syllable confirming my worst suspicions. She wasn't just planning to live off our generosity. She was effectively budgeting my death money, an inheritance that she hoped to seize or manipulate. Once I heard that part, I had to stop the recording for a moment, pressing a hand to my mouth to keep from screaming in rage. The callousness, the near glee in her tone. I never imagined my son could be engaged to a person capable of such cruelty. Here's a moment to share your reaction. Does this shock you, or did you see it coming? Comment 1 if you're astonished by Celia's frankness. 2 if you had a bad feeling all along. I played that recording 3 times. Each repeat hammered the same horror deeper into my consciousness. Celia was orchestrating an elaborate con, and Dominic was her unwitting accomplice. The next question was how to reveal this to my son. Roland urged caution, reminding me that if we blindsided Dominic with the cold facts, he might not believe us. Love can be a stubborn shield against logic. We decided to wait until Dominic showed a hint of readiness, a crack in his defenses, before we lowered the boom. Meanwhile, Celia continued her slow infiltration. She set up house viewing appointments at luxurious condos, texting Dominic about mortgage lenders who specialized in family cosigns. She insisted we come along for showings, claiming our input was invaluable. Once, she even dropped brochures for a Mercedes SUV on our coffee table, with a giant pink post-it note scrawled, "Perfect wedding gift for us." Dominic was starting to look pale and worn out. I saw him trying to push back, gently suggesting smaller homes or used cars. But Celia dismissed him. "Why be cheap?" she'd say with a huff. "Your parents have more than enough to back us up if we slip." One evening, after Celia left, Dominic lingered in the driveway, shoulders slumped. I stepped outside, offering him a mug of hot tea. He took it and said, "Mom, I can't sleep. My mind keeps spinning about everything she wants. I don't want to disappoint her, but I also don't want to hurt you and Dad." I took a careful breath. "You have to figure out who you're trying to make happy, Dominic. Yourself, Celia, or us." My heart ached seeing the conflict in his eyes. He whispered, "If only Celia would compromise a little." That was the crack we'd been waiting for, a sign he was no longer viewing her desires as automatically righteous. Your thoughts, dear reader. Is Dominic too soft, or is he just trapped? Comment 1 if he needs a push. 2 if you think he'll snap out of it on his own eventually. Within days, Dominic texted me, asking if he could come over alone. My pulse sped up. Roland and I agreed this might be the moment to present the evidence. Sure enough, Dominic looked like a ghost when he arrived, dark circles under his eyes, hair slightly disheveled. "Mom, Dad," he began, voice trembling with unspoken regret. "I'm starting to see signs that Celia's not who I thought, but I need something concrete." She explains everything away as, "I just want our family to succeed, and I don't know what's real anymore." That was my cue. I led him into the living room, where I had the audio files ready on my laptop. Roland stood by, arms folded protectively, in case Dominic needed moral support. I pressed play. The recorded conversation from the cafe came flooding out. Celia's crisp voice outlining the steps to get us to co-sign a mortgage, then systematically manage our assets. She joked about how old we were getting, how an eventual inheritance would solve all her worries. At one point, she even mentioned that Dominic was a sweetheart, but naive, concluding with a laugh that once they were married, the old folks won't have a say in anything. Dominic's face went from pale to a sickly shade of green, lips parted in silent shock. Tears pooled in his eyes, but he didn't blink them away. He listened to the entirety of Celia's cruel blueprint without interrupting. When the final note ended, he dragged a trembling hand across his forehead, whispering, "My God, she was using me." I rested a hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry," I said, "not because it was my fault, but because no mother wants to see her child suffer this kind of betrayal." Roland quietly added, "We wouldn't have shown you this if we weren't sure." Please weigh in. Was Harriet right to gather evidence behind Celia's back? Comment 1 if it was necessary. 2 if you believe there was a more direct approach. That evening, Dominic asked to stay in his childhood bedroom just to have space away from Celia's manipulations. I heard him on the phone with her, his voice cracking. "We need to talk," he said. I can't do this. Not with all these demands." Her reaction must have been explosive. I could hear the muffled rise in her pitch, though I couldn't make out the words. He retreated into the room after, shutting the door gently, and for a moment I was thrust back in time, picturing him at 15, upset about a failed test, seeking refuge in the small sanctuary of that room. Only now, the stakes were far higher than a grade on a biology exam. Roland and I didn't press him for details. We wanted him to handle this confrontation on his own. By midnight, I finally tiptoed down the hallway to knock softly. Dominic opened the door, eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "She blamed everything on you two," he said hollowly. "Said you've been plotting to control me. She claims the audio is taken out of context." He swallowed hard. "But I know what I heard. There's no coming back from that." Over the next day or two, he formed a plan to end the engagement. Celia, for her part, flooded him with text messages, voice notes, and tearful pleas for second chances. She insisted she was misunderstood, that she only wanted to safeguard their future. But Dominic had the clarity that only raw truth can bring. He met her in a neutral public place, a local cafe, ironically enough. According to him, she showed up with puffy eyes and a trembling voice, playing the innocent victim. Yet when Dominic refused to budge, her tears dried up like water on hot pavement. She turned cold, accusing him of cowardice. She asked, "Do you realize how much you've cost me?" As if the entire relationship had been a transaction where she'd invested time and now demanded a return. Brief break. How did that confrontation make you feel? Comment 1 if you empathize with Dominic's heartbreak. 2 if you're just relieved he's finally free. Celia's parents launched their own offensive. They phoned Dominic, then Roland, then me, each call more desperate than the last. They insisted we were tearing two lovers apart. They hinted at repercussions, though they never specified what those might be. Ultimately, they fell back on guilt. Our poor Celia. She gave up so many opportunities to be with Dominic. As if her entire future depended on hooking our family's financial safety net, I think the final nail in the coffin came when Dominic realized Celia wasn't just mourning the end of their relationship. She was mourning the end of her grand plan. In a bitter text, she wrote, "I hope you're happy watching me suffer. You've ruined everything." There was no mention of love or heartbreak, only fury at losing an investment. Dominic read the message aloud to me, then calmly hit block. I saw his hand tremble slightly, but his eyes remained forward, like a man refusing to look back at a burning bridge. In the aftermath, we expected the drama to die down. Instead, Celia's parents doubled down on intimidation tactics. At one point, they threatened to sue for emotional distress, an absurd claim that had no standing in any sensible legal framework. We consulted with Lindsay, who reassured us they had no case. "They're just trying to scare you," she said. "Stand firm." And so we did. Dominic, now recovering from the shock of betrayal, started to pick up the shards of his life. He quit the expensive condo hunt, canceled the car shopping plans, and sank into a thoughtful silence about what he truly wanted going forward. Meanwhile, Roland and I felt a mixture of relief and sorrow. Our son was saved from a grim fate, but he was also deeply wounded. His trust had been shattered, not just in Celia, but in his own judgment. I dreaded the possibility that he might harden his heart entirely, believing no one could be trusted after this. Yet sometimes, adversity spares us in ways we don't appreciate until later. Feedback request. Do you think Dominic will recover from this fully? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if you think such betrayal leaves lasting scars. In the weeks that followed, a new rhythm settled over our household. Dominic moved back in temporarily, sleeping in his old bed with posters of rock bands peeling at the corners. He'd rise early, make coffee for Roland and me, and sit at the kitchen table, often leafing through job postings in search of something that better matched his quieter, more conscientious nature. The accounting gig that once seemed stable now felt soulless, especially after the emotional hurricane he'd just weathered. Celia remained conspicuously absent. Every so often, one of her friends would post a jab on social media, something about men who ditch you when times get tough, or family members who spy and pry. But the rumors never turned into real confrontations. In truth, I suspect Celia knew she had no standing. The recording was clear. Her plan was laid out in her own words. If she pushed too hard, we could always release that audio to her workplace or social circles, and she might lose more than just a fiancé. Meanwhile, Dominic spoke occasionally about his life before Celia. He admitted he'd always felt behind in romance, watching friends get married and start families. He latched onto Celia partly out of fear he'd be alone forever. Roland and I tried to encourage him, reminding him that being single doesn't equal failure, especially when the alternative is a toxic relationship. Some nights he'd just wander into the living room, slump onto the couch, and quietly say, "Mom, Dad, thank you." Simple as that. The words were heavy with relief and sorrow, gratitude and regret. "Where's everyone viewing from? Let me know your location again. Comment your city or country just to keep the conversation flowing. We may be sitting here in our little suburban sanctuary, but these words are crossing boundaries and oceans, reminding us that we're all navigating life's storms in one way or another." Bit by bit, Dominic's sadness began to lift. He joked more with Roland, teased me about my obsession with meticulously folding laundry, and even dug his old guitar out of the closet, strumming half-remembered chords that drifted through the house like a half-forgotten lullaby. It was around this time that he met Rowena. She was volunteering at a local community garden that Dominic started frequenting as part of his newfound introspection. He wanted to cultivate something real, as he put it, and found solace in planting seeds and tending to rows of tomatoes, cucumbers, and basil. Rowena was there every Saturday morning, hands caked with soil, a bright scarf tied around her hair to keep it out of the way while she worked. At first, Dominic only mentioned her in passing. "There's this lady at the garden who knows everything about herb care." Then he'd come home with a small pot of rosemary or thyme, proudly showing me how Rowena had taught him the proper watering schedule. Over time, he started talking about more than just plants. "Rowena's mother was a nurse," he said one day, and she was raised to believe in caring for people without expecting a reward. She's grounded, Mom. I felt a cautious spark of hope. Grounded was good. Grounded was real. Maybe this was exactly the antidote Dominic needed after the high-stakes drama of Celia. When Roland and I eventually met Rowena, we recognized a warmth in her eyes that told us she had no hidden agendas. She didn't once ask about our pension or the status of our house. Instead, she brought us a bottle of homemade herbal vinegar she'd brewed for sore joints, though I suspect it was mostly out of kindness, given Roland's constant complaint about his knees. She also admired the old oak in our backyard, saying she loved the history living in the rings of each trunk. She wasn't scanning for potential property. She was appreciating the life we'd already cultivated. Time for another check-in. Are you relieved to see Dominic finding a more genuine connection? Comment 1 if you're rooting for Rowena, 2 if you think Dominic should remain single for a while to heal. Little by little, I saw Dominic's confidence return. He didn't need Rowena to save him, but her presence gently reaffirmed that love can be sincere, supportive, and untainted by greed. Celia's specter eventually reappeared in the form of a surprise phone call. Late one afternoon, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered wearily, half dreading some renewed scheme. Sure enough, it was Celia's voice on the other end. She was in tears, though I couldn't tell if they were genuine. Harriet, she began, I'm calling because I need to apologize. I know I came off strong before, but you have to understand, I was under pressure from my parents. They expected me to solve all our financial problems once I got married. I got caught up in that. I listened, letting her words flow over me like cold water. Could she be truly remorseful? Or was this another gambit? I just want to speak to Dominic, at least once, she pleaded. Will you tell him I'm sorry and that I still care about him? A part of me, the maternal part that yearned for peace, almost considered bridging that gap. But I recalled the recordings, her laughter at the idea of absorbing our assets, her systematic plan. Celia, I said evenly, I think it's best you respect his decision. He's moved on, and so have we. There was a moment of silence, followed by a broken sob, and she hung up. When I told Dominic about the call, he looked at me with equal parts sadness and resolve. If this had happened weeks ago, he said, I might have fallen for it, but it's too late. I know what she's capable of. He politely declined any contact. Rowena, who was with him at the time, placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. She didn't gloat or say, I told you so. Instead, she simply said, Are you okay? And that spoke volumes about her character. Small reflection point. Would you have taken Celia's apology seriously? Comment 1 if you think people can change. 2 if you believe some manipulative behaviors are too deeply rooted to overcome. From that day on, Celia receded into the background of our lives. Occasionally, we'd hear a whisper that she'd moved to a different city or started a new job. But Dominic remained steadfast in his decision not to reopen old wounds. Time has a remarkable way of knitting us back together, given space and patience. Over the next few months, Dominic found a job at a nonprofit focused on helping underprivileged youth learn practical skills, gardening, carpentry, even basic cooking. He said it felt meaningful to watch kids discover they had the power to create something from almost nothing. Roland joked that maybe Dominic would run for mayor someday, given how community-minded he'd become. Dominic only laughed and said, One step at a time, Dad. Rowena became a regular visitor at our house, quietly blending into our routines without the slightest hint of entitlement. She never once asked about money, though she learned we were comfortable enough in retirement. Instead, she'd chat with Roland about new ways to compost or compare notes on herbal remedies with me. I grew to adore her calm spirit. If Celia once reminded me of a flash of lightning, dazzling but potentially destructive, Rowena was like a steady sunrise, warming everything gradually without demanding attention. Dominic confided in me that he was worried he might be too broken to offer Rowena a healthy relationship. Sometimes I still catch myself tensing up, bracing for some demand or hidden motive, he admitted, eyes lowered. I squeezed his hand, reminding him that healing takes time and genuine people will understand. Sure enough, Rowena never pushed him for more than he was ready to give. In a touching moment of trust, Dominic asked if Rowena could see the recording that had ended his engagement with Celia. I want her to know what I've been through, he explained. When she heard Celia's voice spelling out her manipulative blueprint, Rowena's face tightened with empathy and horror. Afterward, she looked at Dominic, who seemed braced for judgment, and quietly said, "I'm so sorry you went through that. You deserve better." Simple words, but the sincerity in them was like a balm on his old wounds. He hugged her, letting out a shaky breath that seemed to carry the last vestiges of Celia's hold on his life. Paused to check in. Do you believe Dominic and Rowena's connection is strong enough to last? Comment 1 if yes, 2 if love always carries risks. 6 months rolled by, each one layering more everyday joy over the bruises of the past. Dominic and Rowena weren't rushing toward marriage. Both had learned the value of pacing themselves, of ensuring hearts were in sync before tying any knots. But they spent their free weekends volunteering side by side, sometimes hosting small dinners at our house, sometimes exploring the local state park. Roland and I found ourselves regaining a sense of ease, as though a dangerous storm had passed. Meanwhile, Celia's chapter grew ever more distant. No more phone calls, no more guilt trips from her parents. Once in a while, a mutual acquaintance would let slip that Celia was seeing someone new, but the details were hazy. Part of me felt pity for her, wondering if she'd repeat the same pattern or learn genuine humility someday. Yet, I also accepted that her journey was no longer my concern. My priority was, and always would be, Dominic's well-being. I remember a late autumn evening when the air was crisp, carrying the aroma of fallen leaves. Dominic and Rowena joined us for dinner, bringing a pot of pumpkin soup they'd prepared together. Over that meal, Dominic caught me watching him with a mixture of gratitude and relief. He grinned and said, "Mom, Dad, thank you for having my back." I responded softly, "It's what parents do." Rowena added, "We've decided to spend the holidays volunteering at the community center hour, cooking meals for those in need. Would you both like to join us?" The invitation was genuine, unpretentious, and a testament to the fact that she wanted us involved, not for financial gain, but for shared purpose. At that moment, I realized how far we'd all come from the painful day I learned Celia had literally been calculating death money. We found ourselves in a new season of life, a simpler one, built on mutual care rather than exploitation. Question for you: has the story's resolution satisfied you? Or are you still hungry for more drama? Comment 1 if you feel at peace with this ending. 2 if you want an even bigger comeuppance for Celia. So here we are, living proof that sometimes the biggest battles happen right under your own roof. And victory doesn't always look like a grand triumph. Often it's the quiet relief of closing the door on deceit and stepping back into the warmth of genuine family bonds. Dominic may bear emotional scars from his ordeal, but he emerged from the experience wiser, steadier, and more aligned with who he truly is. Roland and I, meanwhile, learned a crucial lesson about trusting our instincts when it comes to the people who enter our lives. Our sense of unease was valid from the start, and if we'd squashed it out of politeness, Celia might have burrowed deeper into our finances, perhaps even orchestrating irrevocable damage. In the end, Celia never saw the full extent of the brutal surprise I promised her. She did hear that we'd recorded her phone calls and consultation with Lindsay. Though she never got a copy of the files, I suspect the mere knowledge of that evidence was enough to keep her from retaliating in any severe way. That knowledge alone was the final nail in her scheme's coffin. She underestimated me, saw only a sweet aging mother who could be smooth talked into compliance, but discovered to her dismay that motherly love can turn fierce when her child's future is threatened, and that to me was justice enough. If you're wondering how we spent that inheritance or death money she once counted on, it remains in a safe investment account, exactly where Roland and I intended it to be. A safety net for Dominic in the distant future, or perhaps for grandchildren we might one day welcome into the world. We might even use some of it for traveling when our arthritic knees allow. The key is that the choice is ours and no one else's. Thank you for walking this winding road with me. Sometimes, the most complex stories unfold not in epic novels or blockbuster films, but in the quiet corners of ordinary lives, where human bonds can be tested and illusions shattered, all in the span of a single year. Final engagement. If you enjoyed this journey, comment 1 to share a word of encouragement, or 2 to let me know any suggestions you have for future tales. And there you have it, a gripping tale of family, betrayal, and powerful redemption. Harriet's courage to protect her son and confront Celia head-on was truly inspiring. I hope this story reminded you that sometimes the strongest bonds are tested in the shadows, and that love combined with truth will always triumph in the end. What did you think of Harriet's decision? Did Celia get what she deserved? Or did you see room for forgiveness? Comment below and share your thoughts. Also, let me know from which cozy corner of the world you enjoyed this story. I always love hearing from you. Don't forget to subscribe to her Fireside Stories and hit the notification bell so you'll never miss another captivating tale. Thank you for joining me by the fireside tonight. And until next time, keep your heart warm and your mind open to the incredible stories life has to offer.